Catherine de' Medici arrived in France as a 14-year-old bride with no allies, no influence and no power. The court laughed at her. Her own husband ignored her. By the time she was done, she had outlasted 4 kings and commanded a network of spies that would make modern intelligence agencies nervous. Some called her a political genius. Others called her a poisoner, a sorceress, a serpent in silk. The truth about Catherine de' Medici is far more unsettling than either version. Because she wasn't a villain, she wasn't a saint, she was something rarer, a woman who understood power completely, in a world that was never supposed to give her any. In 1533, a 14-year-old girl stepped off a boat in France and into a world that had already decided she didn't matter. Catherine de' Medici came from the most famous banking dynasty in Europe. The Medicis had funded popes, commissioned Michelangelo, and effectively bankrolled the Renaissance. None of that impressed the French court. They called her the merchant's daughter, a commoner in a crown, an Italian outsider who had bought her way into royalty and would never truly belong. Her husband, the future Henry II, was not unkind to her. He was simply indifferent, which in many ways was worse. He was in love with Diane de Poitiers, a woman 20 years his senior, beautiful, magnetic, and utterly dominant over him. Diane wore his colours at tournaments. Diane received his letters. Diane was consulted on matters of state. Catherine received his visits. Dutiful, brief, and solely for the purpose of producing an heir. For 10 years she failed even at that. A decade of miscarriages, of whispered court gossip, of very real discussions about whether Henry should simply set her aside and find a more fruitful wife. She survived it by doing something that would define her entire life. She watched. She learned. She said very little and remembered everything. And then, finally, the heirs came. 10 children in 12 years, 3 sons who would each become King of France, a daughter who would become Queen of Spain. The woman the court had written off as barren had quietly built the next generation of European royalty. But unfortunately, motherhood didn't give her power. Henry still turned to Diane. The court still looked past her. She had produced everything a queen was supposed to produce. And still, nobody was watching her. That was their mistake. In 1559, a lance shattered inside Henry's helmet during a jousting tournament. He died 10 days later, in agony, while Catherine kept vigil at his bedside. The moment he was gone, she moved with the speed that shocked a court that had underestimated her for 26 years. Diane de Poitiers was expelled from court within weeks. The jewels Henry had given her, stripped back. The chateau that had been her power base, returned to the crown. Catherine dressed herself in black and never changed out of it. Mourning became her armour. Grief became her brand. She ruled first as regent for her 15-year-old son Francis, then after his death barely a year later, for her 10-year-old son, Charles IX. France in the 1560s was a country on the edge of civil war. Catholics and Protestants, the Huguenots, were moving toward open conflict, and every noble faction was trying to use the religious divide to grab power. Catherine's strategy was surgical. She did not pick a side. She played both against each other, keeping herself and the crown as the only stable centre. She negotiated. She arranged marriages. She travelled the country on a 2-year grand progress, showing the young king to his people and showing the nobility who was actually in charge. It worked, for a time. Here is where Catherine's story moves from the political history into something stranger and more fascinating. To rule effectively in a court built on secrets, Catherine needed intelligence. So she built a network, surrounding herself with a group of highly educated, carefully selected noblewomen, her ladies-in-waiting. She deployed them as something closer to an intelligence operation than a social circle. They became known as l'escadron volant, the Flying Squadron. These women were trained in conversation, seduction, and information extraction. They were placed strategically near the most powerful men in France: ambassadors, military commanders, noble faction leaders. And they reported everything back to Catherine. It was elegant, effective, and deeply unsettling to those who eventually realised what she had built. She didn't need spies in cloaks, she had spies in silk. The Flying Squadron gave her something more valuable than any army. She almost always knew what her enemies were planning before they acted. And then there are the darker accusations, the ones that historians still argue about. Catherine was said to have imported, from Italy, an obsession with poison as a political tool. Her perfumer, a man named René Le Florentin, was rumoured to be something more than a maker of fragrances. Gloves saturated with slow-acting compounds, powders in cosmetics, substances that left no trace and no obvious cause of death. These stories may have been largely propaganda. Protestant pamphleteers needed a villain, and a foreign Catholic queen who surrounded herself with Italian advisors was a perfect target. But the rumours had texture. Specific names, specific deaths. Jeanne d'Albret, the mother of the Protestant Henry of Navarre and one of Catherine's key political rivals, died suddenly in 1572, just weeks before the wedding Catherine had arranged between their children. The official cause was tuberculosis. The rumour then and now was poison gloves. No proof exists, but the timing was extraordinary. Catherine was also deeply interested in astrology. Her court astrologer was Nostradamus himself, and she was said to consult a magic mirror that could reveal the future of her dynasty. Whether she genuinely believed in these practices or used them as political theatre, projecting an aura of mystical power, is impossible to say. Possibly both. No portrait of Catherine is complete without her most complicated relationship. Mary, Queen of Scots, arrived at the French court as a 5-year-old child, betrothed to Catherine's eldest son, Francis. She was everything Catherine had never been at that age: adored, celebrated, naturally charismatic. The court was enchanted by her. Catherine was not. She watched Mary with the careful attention she gave everything. And what she saw made her uneasy. Mary was beautiful and beloved, but politically naive. She relied on charm where Catherine relied on calculation. She trusted people who did not deserve it. She wore her emotions openly in a world that punished emotional transparency. When Francis became king and Mary became Queen of France, Catherine found herself, briefly, back in a subordinate position. It was not a position she would ever occupy again if she could help it. Francis died in 1560, after barely a year on the throne. Mary returned to Scotland, a young widow, to a country she barely knew, and a Protestant political establishment that had no patience for a Catholic queen. The two women never met again, but their fates remained intertwined. Catherine manoeuvring the French political situation, Mary careening from one catastrophic decision to the next in Scotland. Catherine watched Mary's downfall, the disastrous marriage to Bothwell, the imprisonment, the flight to England, the long captivity under Elizabeth I, with what we can only imagine was a complicated mixture of sympathy and vindication. Mary had every natural advantage Catherine lacked, and Catherine outlasted her. In August 1572, the wedding Catherine had spent years engineering, between her daughter Margaret and the Protestant Henry of Navarre, brought the Huguenot leadership to Paris. Within days, an assassination attempt on the Protestant Admiral Coligny failed. What happened next in the royal apartments, what Catherine said, what she authorised, what she failed to stop, has been debated for 5 centuries. The bells rang on the night of August 23rd. Thousands died. Whether Catherine ordered a targeted operation that became a massacre, or simply made the calculation not to stop what had already started, the aftermath was clear. She defended it. She framed it as a justified response to a Protestant conspiracy. And she moved on. That capacity to absorb catastrophe, reshape the narrative and continue, was perhaps the most terrifying thing about her. Catherine de' Medici died in January 1589, aged 69. She had outlasted a husband, 3 sons who became kings, and more political crises than most dynasties face in a century. Her enemies left behind a legend: the Black Queen, the Serpent, the Poisoner, the Schemer. Her defenders left behind the record: a woman who held France together, imperfectly, and sometimes brutally, during decades when it should have torn itself apart. The real Catherine is somewhere between those two versions and more interesting than either. She was a girl who was given nothing and built everything. She was a mother who used her children as political instruments and genuinely loved them simultaneously. She was a ruler who understood, more clearly than almost anyone around her, that power is not given. It is constructed, maintained, and occasionally defended by terrible means. The 16th century produced extraordinary women: Elizabeth I, Mary, Queen of Scots, Isabella of Castile. Catherine de' Medici was different from all of them. She was the one they should have been most afraid of. If this is the kind of history that keeps you up at night, the real stories, the ones that are messier and darker and more human than the textbook version, subscribe. Drop in the comments. Do you think Catherine was a political genius, a monster, or something the 16th century didn't have a word for?